The silence that followed my question was so thick you could almost taste it. I sat there at the dinner table, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my parents exchange that look married couples share when they know they've been caught. The turkey was getting cold, the mashed potatoes were congealing, and my entire world was about to flip upside down with 4 simple words from my mother's lips. But we spent it. Those words hit me like a freight train carrying disappointment and disbelief in equal measure. I set my fork down slowly, the metal clinking against the good china my mother only brought out for special occasions. Apparently, this Thanksgiving was about to become very special indeed. "You spent my surgery money," I repeated, not as a question but as a statement that needed confirmation from the universe itself. My father cleared his throat, still not meeting my eyes. "It was for your brother's birthday trip to Nashville. We didn't think it was that urgent." Urgent. The word bounced around my skull like a pinball, hitting every nerve ending on its way down. 6 months of trembling hands, 6 months of dropping coffee cups and struggling to button my Navy uniform. 6 months of pretending everything was fine while my body screamed otherwise, and they didn't think it was urgent. I looked across the table at my brother Ethan, who was suddenly very interested in cutting his turkey into impossibly small pieces. His new truck sat in the driveway, the one my parents had helped finance just last month. His birthday trip to Nashville, apparently funded by my medical necessity, was still fresh in his Instagram posts. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were sitting around a table meant for giving thanks, while I was discovering just how little my family valued my health. Growing up in rural Ohio, our house always smelled like my mother's cooking and my father's disappointment. Not disappointment in life, mind you, but disappointment that seemed reserved specifically for me. Ethan could bring home a C- and get congratulations for trying. I could bring home straight A's and get reminded not to get cocky. When Ethan wanted something, the family budget magically stretched. When I needed something, well, that's what jobs were for. I learned early that being the dependable daughter meant being the invisible daughter. The one who didn't ask for much because asking felt like imposing. I joined the Navy at 21, not to escape but to finally find a place where my contributions mattered, where showing up early and staying late was noticed and appreciated, where precision and dedication were valued currencies instead of afterthoughts. For 8 years, I served with pride, working my way up through the ranks in logistics. I coordinated supply chains that kept entire operations running smoothly. I managed inventories that meant the difference between mission success and mission failure. My commanding officers trusted me with responsibilities that would make civilian managers break out in cold sweats. But none of that seemed to register with my parents. To them, I was still just the quiet daughter who never caused trouble, which somehow translated to the daughter who never needed help. The numbness started 6 months ago during a routine equipment check. I was reviewing inventory sheets when my pen slipped from my fingers for the 3rd time that morning. At first, I blamed it on fatigue. Military life doesn't exactly prioritize sleep schedules. But then the tremors began. Subtle at first, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. My handwriting became shaky. Buttoning my uniform took twice as long. Simple tasks that had been second nature suddenly required conscious effort and concentration. My chief noticed before I was ready to admit there was a problem. During a morning briefing, I fumbled with the projector remote, my fingers refusing to cooperate with the simple button presses. He pulled me aside afterward, his expression a mixture of concern and military pragmatism. "You need to see medical," he said. That wasn't a suggestion. The Navy medical team ran tests with the efficiency I'd come to expect from military operations. Blood work, nerve conduction studies, imaging that made sounds like construction equipment. The results painted a picture I wasn't prepared to see. Compressed nerve pathways, progressive deterioration, surgical intervention recommended sooner rather than later. The doctor, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and firm opinions, didn't sugarcoat the prognosis. Without surgery, I was looking at permanent nerve damage, loss of fine motor control, potentially career-ending complications for someone whose job required precision and dexterity. But she also explained the surgery itself. Delicate work involving nerve decompression and pathway reconstruction. Not exactly the kind of procedure you could schedule during a lunch break. Recovery would take weeks, possibly months, and the cost, even with military insurance covering the bulk of it, would require a significant deposit up front. Since I lived on base and mail delivery was inconsistent, I arranged for all medical correspondence to be sent to my parents' house. It seemed logical at the time. They were my emergency contacts, after all. Surely they understood the importance of medical paperwork. I even texted my mother to give her a heads up. Hospital might send some paperwork my way. Just hold on to it for me. Her response was typically brief. Will do. 2 words that would come back to haunt us both. The surgery was scheduled for early November, giving me time to arrange leave and prepare for the recovery period. The deposit was substantial but manageable with my savings. I had been putting money aside for years, living within my means and building a financial cushion for exactly these kinds of unexpected expenses. Everything was arranged, the paperwork was submitted, the leave was approved. My commanding officer even made arrangements for temporary duty assignments during my recovery period. The Navy, it seemed, was more invested in my health than my own family. October came and went without any word about the surgery scheduling. I assumed no news was good news, that everything was proceeding according to plan. Military operations had taught me that sometimes the best thing you could do was trust the process and focus on the tasks at hand. It wasn't until Thanksgiving week that I realized something had gone wrong. A call to the hospital revealed that my surgery had been postponed indefinitely due to failure to submit the required deposit. The paperwork, they explained, had been returned unopened. That's when I made the phone call that led to this moment. Sitting at my parents' dining room table, learning that my surgery money had been transformed into my brother's birthday adventure. The worst part wasn't even the money itself. It was the casual way they delivered the news, as if they were telling me they'd used my grocery money to buy lottery tickets. As if my health was somehow optional, negotiable, less important than my brother's social media content. You seemed fine, my mother added, as if that somehow justified their decision. Fine. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. I had been anything but fine. I had been struggling daily with a condition that was progressively getting worse. But I had been struggling quietly, professionally, without complaint or drama. And apparently that had been interpreted as not needing help. The turkey was definitely cold now. The conversation had moved past awkward small talk into territory none of us had mapped before. My father was fidgeting with his napkin, folding and refolding it into smaller and smaller squares. My mother was staring at her plate as if the pattern on the china might reveal some escape route from this conversation. And Ethan, poor Ethan, was finally beginning to understand that his Nashville adventure had come at a cost none of us had calculated. I guess you still don't know who really needs the surgery, I said quietly, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room like a stone dropping into still water. Their faces went pale in unison, a synchronized realization that something much more serious than holiday dinner planning had just entered their lives. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. My father's hands had gone completely still on his napkin. My mother's fork hovered somewhere between her plate and her mouth, suspended in that terrible moment when people realize they've stepped into something much deeper than they intended. Who really needs the surgery? I could see the wheels turning behind their eyes, the slow, awful calculation of people trying to solve a puzzle with pieces they'd never bothered to examine. They knew something was wrong with my hands. They'd seen me struggle with simple tasks during my visits home, but they'd never asked the right questions, never pushed past my careful reassurances that everything was manageable. Military training teaches you to compartmentalize pain, to function despite discomfort, to maintain operational readiness regardless of personal challenges. What it doesn't teach you is how to communicate vulnerability to people who've never learned to recognize it. My brother finally looked up from his plate, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "What do you mean, who needs the surgery?" he asked, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since we were children. I flexed my right hand slowly, deliberately, letting them see what I'd been hiding for months. The tremor was subtle, but unmistakable. A fine shake that ran from my fingertips up through my wrist. It was worse when I was tired, worse when I was stressed, and definitely worse when I was sitting at a dinner table learning that my family had prioritized a birthday celebration over my medical needs. "This isn't going away on its own," I said, my voice steady despite the storm building in my chest. "This is progressive nerve compression. Without surgical intervention, I'm looking at permanent damage to my dominant hand." The silence stretched between us like a bridge nobody wanted to cross. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time with its steady tick, each second punctuating the weight of what I'd just revealed. My mother's face had gone ashen. "But you never said it was serious," she whispered, as if the volume of her voice could somehow minimize the magnitude of what they'd done. "I never said it wasn't," I replied. "I told you the hospital was sending paperwork. I told you it was important. I trusted you to handle something that mattered to my health and my career." My father cleared his throat, that familiar sound he made when he was trying to regain control of a situation that had slipped away from him. "We thought," he began, then stopped, seeming to realize that whatever they thought was about to sound inadequate in the face of what they'd just learned. "You thought what?" I asked, not unkindly but with the kind of directness that comes from years of military briefings where clarity matters more than comfort. "We thought if it was really serious you'd have called," my mother said, her voice gaining strength as she grasped for justification. "You'd have insisted. You'd have made it sound urgent." And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that had been brewing in our family for years. They'd interpreted my self-reliance as proof that I didn't need support. My ability to handle problems quietly had become evidence that I didn't have problems worth worrying about. "I've been handling this quietly, because that's what I do," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "That's what you've trained me to do my entire life." Ethan gets the dramatic gestures and the immediate attention. I get the expectation that I'll figure it out on my own. Ethan flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's not fair," he said. But his protest lacked conviction. We both knew the truth of what I'd said, even if nobody had ever spoken it aloud before. Fair would have been asking me what the surgery was for before deciding my medical needs were less important than your birthday trip, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Heavier. More permanent. This wasn't the kind of quiet that gets broken by someone passing the cranberry sauce or asking about dessert. This was the quiet that comes when foundational assumptions get challenged and nobody knows how to rebuild what's been broken. My father was the first to speak, his voice rough with something that might have been regret. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Really?" I took a breath, organizing my thoughts the way I'd been trained to deliver briefings. Clear, concise, factual. "The nerve compression is in my right arm, affecting fine motor control and grip strength. Without surgery, I'm looking at progressive deterioration that could end my military career and impact my ability to perform basic daily tasks." They stared at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. Perhaps I was. The language of consequences, of medical necessity, of understanding that some things can't be postponed or ignored or wished away. "When is the surgery now?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the problem," I said. "When you returned the paperwork without the deposit, I lost my place in the surgical schedule. The next available appointment isn't until February, assuming I can come up with the deposit amount." "Which brings us to another issue," I continued, watching their faces carefully. "The deposit was substantial. I'd been saving for months to cover it. That money is now funding memories of Broadway shows and honky-tonk bars instead of repairing the nerves in my dominant hand." Ethan pushed his chair back from the table abruptly, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I didn't know," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "Nobody told me where the money came from." "I know," I said, and I meant it. This wasn't his fault, not really. He'd been the beneficiary of a system that had been in place long before any of us understood its real cost. But that didn't change the fact that I was now facing months of progressive nerve damage because my parents had decided a birthday celebration took priority over my medical needs. It didn't change the fact that I'd have to drain what remained of my savings to reschedule a surgery that should have happened weeks ago. The turkey was cold. The mashed potatoes had formed a skin. The green bean casserole sat untouched, growing more congealed by the minute, but nobody seemed interested in eating anymore. We'd moved past the point where food could provide comfort or normalcy. "I need you to understand something," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air of the dining room. "This isn't just about money. This isn't just about favoritism or family dynamics or hurt feelings. This is about the fact that my ability to serve my country, to do my job, to maintain my independence, is being compromised because you made a decision about my body and my health without consulting me." My father's hands were shaking now, a tremor that had nothing to do with nerve compression and everything to do with the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders. "What do you need from us?" he asked, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice carried the kind of respect I'd grown accustomed to hearing from my commanding officers. "I need you to understand that this can't happen again," I said. "I need you to understand that being quiet about my problems doesn't mean I don't have problems. And I need you to understand that some decisions can't be undone, some delays can't be recovered from, and some trust, once broken, takes a very long time to repair." The grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, its deep bronze tone echoing through the house like a bell tolling for something that had died during dinner. We sat in that sound, letting it wash over us, each lost in our own thoughts about what came next. Because something had to come next. We couldn't just sit here forever, surrounded by cold food and colder silences, pretending that everything could go back to the way it was before. Too much had been said, too much had been revealed. The careful balance we'd maintained for years, where I absorbed the inequities, and they remained comfortably unaware of their impact, had been shattered as thoroughly as if I'd thrown my plate against the wall. The weight of that silence pressed down on us like storm clouds gathering before a hurricane. I could feel something shifting in the room, not just in the air between us, but in the very foundation of how we understood each other. Years of careful avoidance and polite deflection were crumbling, leaving us exposed to truths none of us had been prepared to face. My mother was the first to break. Her composed facade, the one she'd worn like armor through countless family gatherings and uncomfortable conversations, finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup. "We didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking on each word. "We really didn't know it was that serious." I watched her crying and felt something unexpected wash over me. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but a deep, bone-tired sadness. This wasn't how I'd wanted this conversation to go. I hadn't come here seeking revenge or dramatic revelations. I'd simply wanted my family to understand why their decision had hurt me so deeply. "But ignorance isn't an excuse when someone's health is at stake," I said quietly. "Not knowing doesn't change the fact that you made a choice about my medical care, without asking me what it meant." My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, staring out at the November landscape where bare trees stood like sentinels against the gray sky. His shoulders were rigid, the posture of a man struggling to process information that challenged everything he thought he knew about his family. "How do we fix this?" he asked, without turning around. His voice was hollow, scraped raw by the realization of what they'd done. The question hung between us like a bridge we weren't sure could bear the weight of crossing. How do you fix months of delayed medical care? How do you repair trust that's been shattered by assumptions and neglect? How do you undo decisions that have real, lasting consequences for someone's health and future? "You can't fix it," I said, the words falling like stones into still water. "Not completely. The damage is done. The surgery is delayed. My condition has worsened. My savings are depleted. Those are facts that can't be changed by apologies or regret. Ethan finally spoke up, his voice thick with guilt and something that might have been growing understanding. "The trip," he said slowly. "Nashville, the hotels, the shows, the restaurants, all of it came from money that should have paid for your surgery." I nodded, watching him work through the math of consequences he'd never been asked to calculate before. "I posted pictures," he continued, his voice getting smaller with each word. "I posted pictures of myself having fun with money that was supposed to fix your hands. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Social media memories funded by medical necessity. Instagram posts documenting a celebration that had come at the cost of my health and well-being. I don't want you to feel guilty about enjoying your birthday," I said, and I meant it. "But I need you to understand that choices have consequences, even when we don't see them immediately, even when they're wrapped up in good intentions and family traditions." My mother had stopped crying, but her face remained streaked with mascara and regret. "What can we do now?" she asked. "How can we help?" The question felt like a small crack in a wall that had been standing between us for years. Not the complete demolition I might have hoped for, but an opening large enough to let some light through. "You can start by understanding that this isn't about money," I said. "It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I matter as much as Ethan does. It's about asking questions before making assumptions about what I need or don't need." I could see them processing this, their faces showing the uncomfortable recognition that comes when people realize they've been operating under flawed assumptions for years. "And you can help with the immediate problem," I continued. "The surgery deposit, the rescheduling fees, the additional medical costs that have accumulated because of the delay." My father turned away from the window, his expression heavy but determined. "We'll cover it," he said. "All of it. Whatever it takes." "But money isn't enough," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Money can't undo the months of worsening symptoms. It can't erase the fact that you prioritized a birthday celebration over my health. And it can't rebuild trust that's been damaged by years of being treated as an afterthought." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Less shocked, more contemplative. We were all beginning to understand that this conversation was about more than just surgery money or family favoritism. It was about fundamental questions of value and priority and respect that had been simmering beneath the surface of our family dynamics for decades. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice stronger now, more determined. "I want to pay it back," he said. "The money for Nashville. I want to pay it back myself." "You don't have to do that," I said. But he shook his head firmly. "Yes, I do." He looked directly at me, his eyes clear and resolute. "I've been thinking about this since you started talking, and I realize I've been coasting on a system that wasn't fair to you. I've been benefiting from assumptions and priorities that hurt you, even if I didn't see it happening." His words carried a weight that surprised me. This wasn't just guilt talking. This was understanding. The kind of recognition that comes when someone finally sees a pattern they'd been blind to before. My mother wiped her eyes with her napkin, smearing the last of her makeup. "We've failed you," she said simply. "Not just with this surgery, but in so many ways over the years. We've treated your strength and independence as proof that you didn't need our support, when we should have been treating them as evidence of how much you deserved it." The admission felt like a door opening, letting fresh air into a room that had been sealed shut for too long. "I've been serving my country for 8 years, I said, my voice carrying the weight of accumulated experience and sacrifice. "I've coordinated supply chains that kept military operations running smoothly. I've managed logistics that meant the difference between mission success and failure. I've earned the respect and trust of my commanding officers and my fellow service members." I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But I've never been able to earn that same respect and trust from my own family. I've never been seen as someone whose needs and problems matter as much as everyone else's. And that's been harder to bear than any physical pain this condition has caused me." My father's face was etched with lines I hadn't noticed before, as if the conversation had aged him years in the span of an hour. "I'm proud of your service," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have said that more often. I should have asked about your work, your responsibilities, your challenges. I should have treated you like the accomplished adult you are, instead of the quiet child I remembered." The acknowledgement felt like water on parched earth, soaking into places that had been dry for far too long. We all sat there for a moment, surrounded by the debris of assumptions and expectations that had been blown apart by honesty and consequence. The dinner table, which had started the evening as a symbol of family gathering and Thanksgiving, had become something else entirely. A battlefield where old wounds had been opened and examined, where uncomfortable truths had been spoken aloud for the first time. But it was also something more hopeful than that. It was a place where understanding had begun to take root, where recognition had started to bloom, where the possibility of something better had been planted in the soil of what was broken. The grandfather clock chimed again, marking another half-hour that had passed while we sat in the ruins of our old family dynamic, trying to figure out how to build something new from what remained. The weight of that moment settled over us like dust after an explosion. Everything that had been carefully arranged and politely maintained in our family had been scattered across the table along with the cold mashed potatoes and untouched cranberry sauce. We were all staring at the pieces, trying to figure out what could be salvaged and what needed to be swept away entirely. My mother reached across the table tentatively, her fingers stopping just short of my bandaged hand. The gesture was small, uncertain, but it carried more meaning than years of casual birthday cards and holiday phone calls. "Can I see it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I extended my right arm slowly, letting her see the brace that had become my constant companion. The medical device looked stark and clinical against the warm lighting of the dining room, a reminder that some problems couldn't be solved with good intentions and family dinner. She studied the brace with the intensity of someone seeing evidence of their own failure made tangible. Her fingers traced the air above it, not quite touching, as if contact might somehow make the reality more real than she was prepared to handle. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Not exactly," I said, flexing my fingers within the confines of the support structure. "It's more like numbness that comes and goes. Tingling that starts in my fingertips and travels up my arm. Sometimes my hand just stops working entirely, like the connection between my brain and my fingers gets cut off." My father had returned to his seat, but his posture remained rigid, alert. The kind of attention he'd learned in his own military service decades ago, when missing details could have consequences nobody wanted to contemplate. "How long has this been happening?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who suddenly understood he needed complete information. 6 months of symptoms, I said. 3 months of medical evaluations, 2 months of coordinating with specialists, and scheduling surgery. 1 month of waiting for paperwork that never came because you decided a birthday party was more important. Each time frame hit the table like evidence in a court case, building a chronology of choices and consequences that couldn't be argued away or minimized. Ethan pushed his plate away entirely, the gesture sharp and final. "I need to understand something," he said, his voice stronger than it had been all evening. "When you say career ending, what exactly does that mean?" I looked at him, this brother who'd lived his entire life insulated from the kinds of consequences I was facing. His world had always been one where problems got solved by other people, where safety nets appeared without him having to weave them himself. "It means I lose fine motor control permanently," I explained with the clinical precision my medical training had taught me. "It means I can't perform the detailed work my job requires. It means I lose my military specialization and get reassigned to duties that don't require steady hands. It means starting over professionally at 30, assuming the Navy keeps me at all." The implications spread across his face like ripples in still water. He'd never considered that careers could be fragile, that specialized skills could be lost, that the foundation of someone's professional life could crumble because of delayed medical care. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that my professional life mattered. That it wasn't just something I did to pass time until I found something better. That I'd built something valuable, something I was proud of, something worth protecting. I've been running logistics for 8 years, I continued, watching him process information he'd never bothered to learn before. I coordinate supply chains that keep military operations functioning. I manage inventories worth millions of dollars. I make decisions that affect mission readiness and operational success. My voice carried the pride I felt in my work, the satisfaction that came from being trusted with responsibilities that mattered. But it also carried the fear of losing all of that because my family hadn't understood its value. My mother was crying again, but these tears were different. Quieter, deeper, like grief for something precious that had been carelessly broken. "We never asked about your work," she said, the admission falling between us like a confession. "We never wanted to know because we were afraid we wouldn't understand it." The honesty was unexpected, raw in a way that made the air in the room feel thinner. But it also felt like progress, like the kind of truth-telling that might actually lead somewhere productive. "I would have explained it," I said gently. "I would have been happy to share it with you, but you never seemed interested in hearing about anything beyond whether I was eating enough vegetables and getting adequate sleep." My father's hands were flat on the table now, steadying himself against revelations that kept coming like waves against a seawall, each one wearing away another piece of the assumptions he'd built his understanding of our family on. "The surgery," he said, his voice thick with something that might have been shame. "When you reschedule it, what are the risks of the delay?" This was the question I'd been dreading, the one that forced me to confront the full scope of what their decision had cost me. Not just money or inconvenience, but potentially permanent changes to my body and my future. "The longer we wait, the more the condition progresses," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that lived underneath it. "More nerve damage, less likelihood of complete recovery, increased chance of complications during surgery." I paused, making sure they understood the weight of what I was telling them. "Best case scenario after the delay, I continue with some permanent limitations, but maintain most function. Worst case scenario, I lose significant use of my dominant hand permanently." The silence that followed felt like a prayer nobody knew how to finish. We sat there with the magnitude of what had been risked for a birthday celebration, what had been gambled away for Instagram photos and Broadway shows. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood with a sound like fingernails on stone. "I can't sit here anymore," he said, his voice tight with emotion I'd rarely heard from him before. But instead of leaving, he walked around the table to where I sat. For a moment, he just stood there, looking down at me with eyes that held years of recognition finally dawning. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words carried weight they'd never held before. Not just sorry for the money or the birthday trip, but sorry for a lifetime of accepting benefits I didn't question and advantages I didn't examine. "I know," I said, "because I did know. This wasn't malicious. It was just the natural result of a system that had been in place so long none of us had thought to question it. But knowing wasn't enough anymore. Understanding wasn't sufficient to undo the damage that had been done or prevent it from happening again. We needed something more substantial than apologies and recognition. What we need," I said, looking at each of them in turn, "is a different way of being family. One where my needs matter as much as everyone else's. Where my problems get the same attention and resources as anyone else's. Where being quiet and capable doesn't make me invisible." My mother nodded slowly, her face streaked with mascara and determination. "How do we do that?" she asked. "How do we learn to be better?" The question felt like a door opening onto territory none of us had mapped before. We were going to have to figure out how to rebuild trust that had been damaged by years of assumptions and neglect. How to create new patterns when the old ones were so deeply ingrained they felt like natural law. "We start by being honest," I said. "About needs, about problems, about what matters to each of us. No more assuming that quiet means fine. No more pretending that independence means not needing support. My father was nodding, his expression grave but committed. "We can do that," he said. "We should have been doing that all along." The grandfather clock chimed the hour, its deep bronze tone marking time that had passed while we sat in the wreckage of old assumptions, trying to build something new from what remained. The dinner was cold, the evening was late, and we were all emotionally exhausted from truths that had been years in the making. But something had shifted. Not everything, not all at once, but enough to let light into spaces that had been dark for too long. Enough to suggest that change was possible, even if it wouldn't be easy or quick. Because the hardest part wasn't the surgery or the money or even the delayed treatment. The hardest part was learning how to be a family that actually saw each other clearly, without the filters of favoritism and assumption that had distorted our vision for so long. And that work was just beginning. Just beginning. The weight of that realization settled over the dining room like fog rolling in from a distant shore. We had crossed into territory none of us had charted before, where old maps no longer showed the landmarks we needed to navigate by. The familiar rhythms of our family gatherings had been disrupted by truths that demanded more than polite acknowledgement. My mother reached for her water glass with trembling fingers, the simple gesture revealing how deeply this conversation had shaken the foundation of everything she thought she understood about our family. The ice had long since melted, leaving only lukewarm water that nobody really wanted to drink. "I need you to know something else," I said, my voice cutting through the heaviness that had settled between us like sediment in still water. "The surgery isn't just about my hands anymore. It's about whether I can trust any of you with something that matters to me." My father's face went pale at those words, the color draining from his cheeks as if someone had pulled a plug somewhere deep inside him. Trust had always been the unspoken currency of our family relationships, something we assumed existed without ever really examining what it meant or what it cost when it was broken. "We've broken something, haven't we?" he said, and it wasn't really a question. It was recognition dawning like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Yes," I said simply. "You have." 6 months later, I sat in a different hospital room, watching my fingers move freely for the first time in over a year. The surgery had been successful, though not without complications from the delay my parents had caused. Some sensation never fully returned, a permanent reminder etched into my dominant hand of what happens when family fails to recognize what truly matters. My relationship with my parents didn't heal as cleanly as my nerve pathways did. Trust, it turns out, requires more delicate reconstruction than compressed nerves. But we're learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, how to see each other clearly for the first time in decades. Ethan kept his word and paid back every cent of that Nashville trip, working extra shifts for months to cover what his celebration had cost my health. More importantly, he started asking questions about my life, my work, my challenges, treating me like the accomplished adult I'd become rather than the quiet child he remembered. The real surgery, though, wasn't the one that repaired my hand. It was the one that cut away years of assumptions and favoritism that had infected our family like a slow-growing tumor. Some families never recover from that kind of operation. Others, if they're willing to endure the pain of honest healing, come out stronger than they were before. Mine is still in recovery. But for the first time in my life, I believe we might actually make it through.